Thank you for coming. And first of all, I'm Robert, this is David, and I just wanted to thank the League of Women Voters. This is such a great honor to be here in this space talking and to have been invited by the League. And I can't think of a better civic organization in our country at this moment, you know. And so I'm very grateful to the League, and everyone should support them if they don't already do so. So anyway, thanks to all of you, and to Kelly in particular for putting up with our questions and how's it going to work and all of that. So it's great to be here.
And thank you for all of you who are here. It really is a thrill to be back in one of the 50 Capitol buildings that we have been photographing, and to be here talking about the work. And it's great to do that in front of an interested audience.
So we thought we'll do this in a couple of parts. We'll give you, first we'll talk a little bit about the project in general, how it came about, a little bit of that. The slideshow that's running are the photographs from the book. And it's just, so it's, at some point you'll see something from all 50 states. And per state, the number of pictures runs between 3 and 8. 8, of course, being Connecticut, since, you know, we're from here and we thought, why not? And it's one of the best capitals you can see. So, this is rolling along. We're not going to specifically talk about those things, but we'll, at the end of the program, time allowing, we'd be happy to answer any questions and talk about specific capitals and so on. We're going to do another part that concentrates on the pictures we took here in this building. But we'll start off with a general sort of discussion of how we got going. Do you want to?
Sure. It must have been in 2013, Rob, who I'd known since approximately 1979 or 80, had seen some of the photographs that I happened to do in a couple of Capitol buildings. I think the one that struck him that he saw mostly was in Columbus, Ohio, on my trips back and forth from here to Iowa, where I had been photographing since 2004. I stopped at a few capitals here and there because it just seemed like probably would be interesting structures to photograph. Rob saw these pictures and they connected for him with a book that I wasn't familiar with yet, called Courthouse, which was published in, I think, 1978. And it was a photographic exploration from, I don't know, roughly 20 photographers, maybe, mostly excellent photographers. And they photographed courthouses all over the country. There was a lot of information in the book about courthouses, but there were a lot of spectacular photographs. And Rob came to me and said that he has an idea for a project we can work on together, which we had never done before. And I thought, wow, I like this idea. He made me wait for about a week before we got together and he told me the idea, but he suggested, why don't we photograph all 50 state capitol buildings? And I immediately thought that was an interesting and exciting idea. We were both doing a lot of cross-country traveling for various photographic and not quite photographic related purposes. And in the early spring of 2014, we went on a short trip visiting capitals in New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts.
Yeah.
To kind of test the idea, see if it made sense. Did our work look good together? Was it not so similar, though, that it didn't make sense? And we very quickly realized that this was indeed an exciting project, and we officially launched it. So by later that year, we were both off doing quite a bit of photography work. We did not necessarily have the idea that, oh, this will be a book project. It was more of just a photographic project. Let's take pictures, see if we can make really good, strong pictures. But then over the years, as we continued to do this, the project really took on something of its own momentum as we learned more about our own photography and our own explorations relative to these buildings. And the project really picked up.
Yeah, originally David was doing and is still doing an ongoing project photographing in the Midwest, particularly the upper Midwest and the mountain states in the northern part of the country. And so he was going back and forth to that part of the country. I had one of my kids had just gotten a job in Southern California, and there was a whole car exchange thing going on. So I had reason to drive diagonally across the country. And one of the practical things, since this was a completely self-funded project, was that we would divide and conquer and divide up the states based on where we would be traveling anyway. And we proceeded to do that. And interestingly, once the book was published, we both, I'd say there are about 14 or 15 capitals for each of us that we haven't been to. And now we want to go and do them all, you know, just for our own, to have been there and done that. And so we're still actually taking pictures of the different capitals. A little less pressure to do every single picture we think we have to do, but it's still great fun. I think one of the things about, I was speaking to someone just before the program, and she said she hadn't been here in decades, you know, and is from Ohio and hadn't been into the Ohio Capitol. And I think for a lot of us, maybe the one time we were in the state Capitol building was a 5th grade school trip or something. And so when we started, part of I was wondering, how's this going to work out? Is it going to be interesting enough? Is it going to be repetitive, too repetitive? And we very quickly understood that not only was it interesting, but it was completely fascinating. I mean, by visiting these buildings, you see the whole history of the American political project, the back and forth of struggles between people and ideas that differ from one another. One really interesting and unusual example is the capital of South Carolina in Columbia. You walk in and it's something of a mausoleum to the Confederacy. And walking around, I mean, they have a 5-foot marble carved replica of the Articles of Secession. And I'm looking at that going, is that treason? I mean, you know, it's up there on the wall. And then, just outside of the Capitol, on the Capitol grounds, is one of the most beautiful sculptures dedicated to the lives of African Americans from the Middle Passage up until contemporary times. And there they are, both of those things in that place. Now that's a somewhat extreme example, but it's not unique. Oklahoma, which a large part of that was, I don't want to use the word concentration camp, but you know, the eastern tribes were forcibly removed to there, and when you go to the building, all of the art from the past, say 30 years or so, sculpture, paintings, and so on, are by and about Native Americans who are residents of Oklahoma. And they're like, hey, we're here. And that kind of interplay between different groups, and you know, not always, and these are two somewhat antagonistic and fraught examples, but there are other examples of the back and forth of how we govern ourselves. And that, it's there in the buildings, it's there in the artifacts. But also in these buildings are assembly rooms, meeting rooms, podiums, where people are exercising their ideas about how do we make this work? How do we get along? How do we live in this place? How do we make the laws that govern us? It's quite moving, actually. And if you haven't visited a lot of capitals, you definitely got to stop if you're anywhere near one of them. And there are groups of people who organize their travels around the state capitals, which when I first started, I knew about some of that, and I thought, wow, that's kind of a weird thing, even though I'm doing the same thing. And but now I'm like, oh, I get it. I totally get it. Anyway, it's a great way to see the country.
Another aspect of this that became more and more evident to us as we explored these buildings was something that we probably all know if we ever watch any television news, and that is that the state capitol buildings are used quite regularly as the background for getting a message across, a protest, something in support of, whatever that message might be. And I think, particularly because I became familiar with so many of the buildings, if I saw something on the news and it was like, oh, yeah, I was standing right there. So I think part of it is these places, we're very aware of them. We tend to know it, but as Rob said before, we met so many people along the way and in talking about the project afterwards who haven't been to their own capital or haven't been there in many, many years, because often the reason to come for a lot of people is when your school in 4th or 5th grade does a class trip to your capital. And I assume that's as long as you're not living too many hundreds of miles away, which is certainly going to be the case in some states, particularly in the West. I was in Madison, Wisconsin, and I had been photographing throughout the morning, and it was noon, and all of a sudden there was all this loud noise and singing. There was a group that apparently would come in every day at lunchtime. They would go up to the 2nd floor of the rotunda, circle the rotunda, drop their banners down, and sing. And honestly, I don't remember what their message was, but for that hour, they had permission to come in every day from noon to 1. The sound, this is a very, very stone building, and the sound just reverberated throughout. It was somewhat overwhelming. And then promptly at 1 o'clock, they were done, rolled up the banners, and left the building. That was the most immediate and firsthand time that I witnessed that. But lots of times during the course of our photographing, we would see a little press conference being set up. Maybe that was for the governor or someone else who worked in the building. Sometimes it's out on the front steps, sometimes it's in the rotunda, but it's a fairly constant thing that as a way that we use these buildings.
The other, I'm realizing we're talking a little bit about the sociological sort of connection to the buildings, what they mean in our society and so on, which is a huge part of thinking about these buildings. But frankly, from David and my point of view, we're really interested in making good photographs. And the book is subtitled A Photographic Portrait, and that's what we wanted this to be. It's not, the book isn't meant to be a guidebook. It isn't meant to be a comprehensive view of every capital, exterior, House chamber, Senate chamber. We did a lot of that, but in putting the book together, we were trying to put together the strongest photographs. And that's, photography is really unique in that way. It can be an art form, but it also carries very precise information. And how you navigate that can be the difference between a picture that's memorable and one that's forgettable. So, you know, for us, trying to make the best pictures we could make was a big part of what we were doing. And so you'll find unusual pieces from the building, stairways, hallways, out-of-the-way things, because first of all, it gives a sense of the building as a living, working place, but also it's what struck us visually. And in a little bit, we'll talk a little more specifically about this building and the photographs we took here, and you'll be able to literally look to the right and left and see some of where we were standing and what we were thinking. So we'll get to that shortly. Should we move on to that, or I do want to leave time for questions, because that's usually where a lot of things come out about the whole project and so on, and I want to be mindful of the time.
Yeah, we could let's go to the Connecticut pictures, because we can always come back to
okay,
to this group.
All right, let's do that.
While Rob's looking for that piece of the slideshow, I will point out, because I keep looking at this photographic portrait of Abraham Lincoln to my left. One of my earliest observations, once I had photographed enough buildings and experienced enough of these different spaces, was I was realizing that I kept seeing Abraham Lincoln in photographic portrait, in painting, sculpture, inside buildings, outside buildings. And I noticed also, well, there's quite a bit of George Washington as well, and that made perfect sense. But I had been photographing largely northern and western and midwestern buildings. And then in 2017, I think, I did a trip to the South and noticed that I never saw Abraham Lincoln. I kept seeing George Washington, but no Lincoln. And I found, you know, we accumulate these experiences and things that we notice, the observations through this process. That one really struck me, and I think we talked about that a lot, to the point where at one time, once we had pretty much selected the pictures for the book, we went through and we did a count. How many pictures do we have of Lincoln? How many photographs that include a likeness of Lincoln, and how many of Washington? It was pretty close. I don't remember the numbers.
It was pretty close. It was pretty close, but Lincoln, I think, won out in terms of, Lincoln's everywhere except the South, the old Confederacy, which is, I mean, it says a lot. I don't know what to tell you. I do want to interrupt for 1 second. This is the map, an early version of the map. And the red and blue has nothing to do with Democrat and Republican. As you can see, you know, his school color was blue, my school color was red. So we just, we were kind of trying to figure out, okay, who's going to go where, how are we going to organize these trips. The green up was ones we did together. Now, if we were to redo this map, it would be a little different, because we altered a few things. And
it would be substantially different, and quite a bit more jumbled.
More jumbled, but
and a lot
still,
more green.
A lot more green, because we wound up going, we both went to certain capitals, not necessarily at the same time. But anyway, this was kind of our crude way of, like, how are we going to make this work? Anyway, it was, I just thought I would point that out.
An example of one of the things we experienced in photographing these, you'll see that Denver is green. That was originally, I believe it was on my list. I got there, and massive restoration project going on. The entire exterior of the building was covered in scaffolding, and then the scaffolding was tarped in blue, so you really couldn't see the building. And inside, much of it was closed off, being renovated. So I think I left there with maybe 1 or 2 pictures that I thought had any real hope in them. So it was then that moved to Rob's list, because he was going to be driving right through there on his next trip. So that became a joint one. And then one of the things we didn't talk about is how, as the project evolved and we started to understand what we were looking for in the way of the photographs, rather than merely going into a building and taking some pictures, we each returned to many of the buildings multiple times. And sometimes that was my returning to one that he had done or the other way around. So a lot of them became joint projects that we each have photographs from a certain capital in the book.
We also had an influence on each other over the years. I think if early on there was maybe a bit more of a visual difference between David's pictures and my pictures. But I think what we each was doing on our own influenced the other in terms of thinking about pictures we would take. And then when we were doing the editing for the book, I think it pushed the look of the pictures even closer together. And we do have a list in the back of the book. We decided not to label each picture individually with our names. That would be ridiculous on the page. It would be repetitive in a way. And we have a list in the back. And it's exactly equal numbers of pictures. And we were dedicated to that idea, which we, carried out. And I've gotten several comments from people that they don't know who took what picture, and that, I think at this point of the project, that's a good thing. We really did come together in how to make this work. So now you're looking at what we did here in this capital. The first bunch are yours because of the way they're titled.
Okay, I'll talk a little bit. This, to me, is an example of a type of picture that I cautioned myself early in the project. Don't just do pictures like this. To me, this is the kind of view that goes on the postcard, that goes on the cover of a guidebook. On the other hand, this is really spectacular, the subject matter, and it had to be photographed. I just felt like you can't get away from that. I believe the next one is what's in the book. And in fact, in this case, it wasn't, I don't believe, until much later that I went back to these images and looked at them a little bit more. This one, to me, was kind of the clear winner. When we started the project, we were both thinking largely black and white, but that we would do some color when that made sense. And I think during the course of the project, it became clear to both of us, probably more so to Rob, that this needed color as well. But early on, this one stood out as the image, and later I looked at them, probably converted some of them back to color. These were all digital files, so we had the option of flipping back and forth between color or black and white.
On the issue of color and black and white, this is one of these things that keeps photographers awake at night, literally. Nobody else cares. But it's when it's part of your life like that, it can just drive you crazy. But my friend and mentor and a friend of David's, John Hill, over here, was an early person we showed the book to, and he was a very strong advocate for doing more color images because of the information and the beauty, and so that had a big influence on us as well. And we over time, I don't know, are there more color pictures in the book than black and white now?
I don't know.
I don't know either. We used to know these things, but that was like a year ago. Might as well be 50. So anyway, but that ongoing discussion of color versus black and white became part of the project and how we work things out together. This is from the house chamber, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which is upstairs, and we were able to. That was actually the hardest part of this building, was getting access to the House and Senate chambers, but we were able to work that out.
it did have to do with parties and different views on COVID and opening or closing of buildings. But we were able to squeeze it in just in time to get some new pictures into the book. Go to the next one.
Yeah, this is also the House chamber, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and this is the Senate.
Yep. Keep going. I'm looking for one of the pictures. That's also the Senate. That one. That, I believe, is in a, I don't know what you call it, a meeting room, legislative meeting room. To me, it's a really good example of, let's say, the opposite of the first photograph, using the statue and looking up into the dome. The sorts of things that we generally would pay a lot less attention to when we're walking through a Capitol building. It's just a quiet but telling moment to me about the use of a building. There's nothing going on there right now, but we know people will be sitting there. There's a few, I think, in this group that's similar. The folders in the foreground, either a meeting was about to take place or had, I don't know which. Is that yours or mine?
I have a version of this. This is yours.
Okay. See, sometimes we don't even know.
Yeah.
In fact, we've often talked as we're going through pictures, and we do our own editing initially, but especially when it came to, all right, which pictures are going in the book, we did that, spent a lot of time together going through all of the pictures.
Yeah.
And sometimes there was a picture of mine that I wasn't so excited about including, but Rob was, and he'd really pushed for it. It worked the other way around. It was a really interesting process, and I think the fact that we came through it still as friends was said something about our many-year friendship.
Yeah, it's been a pretty good marriage. Could be worse, right?
Could be worse. I've certainly learned a lot from Rob. He has claimed that he has done the same from me. It's really collaborating on a project is a very different process than most of what we do the rest of the time, which is working on our own.
Right.
And there's definitely a lot to be said for it.
Yeah, and photography really can be a very solitary activity, which is one of the things that drew me to it. I like being my own person, my own boss, all of that. So when we did this project, I mentioned earlier that we committed to being equal in the outcome of the use of the pictures. And that agreement that we made and that we stuck to was so important, because, you know, otherwise it becomes a tug of war of whose pictures, how to, you know, this, that, the other thing, and that's where things break down. But we never wavered from the commitment to be equal in the project, and that really helped us a lot. I mean, we never questioned that. It just didn't come up. It was like, oh, somehow things are unequal, we got to address that, and we just did.
It was a given.
And yeah, it was. We're happy to give seminars to legislators if they want to hear about that. You know? Oh, this is a nice one. We should have put that in the book.
That's one of mine that has never excited me so much. I don't know why, but I put this one in the group.
Where's that? That's over here, right?
Yes.
Yeah. This is inside this.
Looking that way.
Inside this central area. Very interesting space, and I have a couple of pictures from that space as well. So it's interesting that we chose different viewpoints. I like this picture a lot. This is David's picture, and I like the sort of seemingly random pieces. But you know, when you start looking at the color pieces and the inclusion of the flag and the little bit of the wing over here, it really starts to come together. That, of course,
Right
is
there.
right there. And this, if you line yourself up properly, you see that guy through the doors over here. And I put together this Connecticut slideshow last night, and I was bugging him, send me pictures, and I saw this, I said, wait a minute, I took that picture, and then I looked, and I have the exact same picture with a slightly different cropping, but the guy is in the same window from the same angle, and we had no idea we had both done that. It was just...
But interestingly, I would say that that rarely happens.
Yeah.
We can photograph the same subject matter and take drastically different pictures, which is more often than what happens, at least drastically different in our view, or, wow, I can't believe I didn't see that when I was there.
Right.
And in fact, going back a few pictures, the view looking straight this way, I was inspired to do that after seeing Rob's picture over here, the tall vertical of the Lincoln photograph. But I knew I couldn't touch that side. Rob had just nailed that photograph so well that I wasn't going to touch it. But I wanted to see what I could do in a similar architectural structure over here. Well,
This is just, yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
well, that's over this side, and this was an example of a picture that exists because of the light at that moment. And one of the things that also drives photographers crazy, I'll see something because of the light, and by the time I get the camera on the tripod or get the camera raised to here, the light has changed and the picture's gone. But this one held long enough for me to get that.
Yeah, this is one of those things where it was, we were here in February or March or something. There are no leaves on the trees out there. I know it was chilly, but it was one of those bright, clear, sunny winter days. And, the sun was relatively low. And this was toward the end of when we were here. And we were both like, wow, look at that. It just, the light coming through in this wonderful way. And if you saw that in the morning, you'd walk right by, you wouldn't think of it, And as a photographer, that's one of our things is being opportunistic in the sense of when you see something, especially if it's involving the light, you want to strike then and not wait because it'll disappear. This is mine, right?
That's yours.
Yeah. So, yeah, this is just, I'm very interested in statues. I photograph statues a lot, and of course the Capitol building statues, they're everywhere, in almost all of the capitals, and it gave me a great opportunity to interact with that kind of three-dimensional art in a two-dimensional way. And this is we were talking about this view here. This is downstairs, I guess, or leading up. Where is this?
It's got to be on this floor, I think.
Yeah, leading up to the other side. And I'm just interested in this picture, in the layers of textures, the repetition of the columns, the repetition of the curved archways. It's one of those things. I'm putting a picture together. It's not like, oh, that column was made by such and such an architect. It's more about what does that look like, and how do things look like when you put a box around them and they become two-dimensional. They're different. It's a different thing, and you'll see that in a minute. This is a picture from the book, and it's of that column. And interestingly, I had my back to these larger columns here, and I couldn't fit the whole thing in. So one thing David and I, this may be like too nerdy for most of you, but we both worked with shift lenses. So you have a camera like this, right? And the lens can move up and down. So you can keep lines, vertical without them converging visually. So I took one photograph and then I raised the lens and took another photograph to get the top of the column and then put them together after the fact in the computer. And they go together seamlessly because the camera's not moving. And both David and I did that a number of times throughout this project. And it's a tedious thing, but it allows you to get views that you would not normally be able to get. The only way to get the bottom and top of the column would be to have a very wide angle lens, which creates other distortions. This way, by taking a more normal lens and raising and lowering the element on the lens, you get a much more normal drawing of an area that you otherwise couldn't encompass in one picture. Oh, the other really more interesting thing about this picture, I like it. I like the picture. I think it's beautiful. I think it works well. But I invite you to read the plaque underneath the portrait of Lincoln. I didn't read the plaque when I shot the picture. I love the column. I love the colors. And then for a show we did, I made a big print, like, a 50-inch print, tall print. I get the thing out, there's the plaque, very readable in front of me. It was donated by a person who was a Holocaust survivor in gratitude to the state of Connecticut for taking him in after his ordeal during the Second World War. And it suddenly made the picture that much more compelling. It's interesting to me. I was like, when I'm photographing, and I think David would say the same thing, you're concentrating so hard on making the picture work, you don't always see all the ramifications until later.
I think that's very true. We miss a lot of things while we're photographing because of the set of things that we are paying attention to exclusively.
This picture, I love this picture actually. That guy is right around the corner over here. You have this image of victory and you have this broken soldier. To me, that carries a kind of density of meaning. Now, that statue was not purposely made that way. It was, beaten up by time and the elements. But I feel like it carries a weight beyond just the objects in the picture. Yeah, it's a working building, right? This is right over here, and this is the kind of picture I was influenced to make by looking at a lot of David's pictures. David had a real talent for picking out the mundane detail that tells a bigger part of the story. And I was in that area photographing the Nathan Hale statue, and I turned and looked and I thought, oh, David would take that picture, I better do it. So. Oh, and this is upstairs outside of the legislative chamber. I don't know, it looks like an Escher or Piranesi. I love all the crazy angles and pieces and the way they come to, you just stand there and it's all there in front of you,
That's a wonderful photograph. I don't remember seeing that one, Rob. Why isn't that in the book?
Well, we have to do another, we're going to do a second volume, and then, second edition, it'll have 1,000 pictures, and, you'll be able to kill small rodents with it or something, I don't know. And then this, I was here with my friend Lena. We were installing a thing in the hallway for the medical school, the Yale Medical School, and she goes, "You got to see this." And up on the top view, the top floor of the legislative office building, you turn and there it is, and getting it lined up, and again, the sun was perfect. You come here on a cloudy day, it's not going to be the same. You're looking at it in the morning, it's not going to be the same. It's just one of those serendipitous things that You see it, and now's the time. And then, sometimes a stand-up portrait is the way to go. You just, there it is, here it is, the light's beautiful, it looks great, the cars are not too much of a nuisance. Not everything has to be a tortured work of art. You can just stand there and photograph it as it is, and it speaks for itself. I thought that guy was pretty good. And the light on him is good. I don't know. And then this is very similar to your picture. I think from the other side. Yep. You were on the right side, I was on the left side. Anyway, great minds think alike, I guess. And this is in the Senate chamber. And this is an example of, again, in order to get from the bottom to the top, I did 3 exposures. Moving the lens, the middle picture would be, from above the railing, showing the seating. The top picture is the ceiling, and the bottom picture is that front gate. And, the camera doesn't move, but the lens moves, and you take the different exposures, and then afterward you put them together to make this one photograph. Now, if you stand there, your vision is such that you can see it that way, but a camera is not going to do that unless you have a very wide-angle lens, and then it becomes a different thing. It doesn't read in a more normal way. But by being able to put together these segments of the picture, it reads almost the way it would if you're standing there looking at it. So again, David and I did a lot of that throughout this project. And
I would say the majority of pictures we did, we were using shifting and combine. Although sometimes we just shift the lens to get the single view that we're after. Sometimes we shift it and take multiple pieces and stitch them together.
This is upstairs somewhere. I think over there. There's kind of a room, like I don't know what it is, like
I think it's in the back of the same room, that same meeting room that I had photographed the 2 chairs in. That was up at the front of the room. I think it's the same one.
One wall has the funny wallpaper, the nice wallpaper.
Anyway,
it's just, again, it's just, you can't not take that picture with the red chairs and the blue books, I mean, and the light was beautiful, and it's here. It's part of the ambiance of the place. It's part of the broader meaning of what this place is as a home to a body of people doing work, And then this is the staircase on that side, looking down. These are the statues that are up top around the dome, and they represent different Greek deities having to do with agriculture and various other things. I used to know what they were, but that's gone. Again, this is one of those pictures put together bottom and top so that you can read the space in a more open way. And I just like this kind of conclave of women having some kind of eternal discussion there on the stairway. And there's Nathan Hale over here. I've got him from the front, I've got him from the side, I've got him from, close up. I did a bunch of different pictures. David, you probably shot something in there.
Maybe, but not much.
And
I can't even think of a picture I have of
there was something about this. He's presenting himself, I guess, at his trial. And being at this angle made me feel like more of a participant in the old event. It's like you're part of the crowd or part of the observation. I don't know. It felt more connected than just looking at the front of the statue. It's a beautiful statue, but I don't know. This version worked better for me, I think. And then this is an alternate view. It's actually from right about here. I was probably right where the TV is, shooting this way. I did think, I like this picture, I like the light, but I did think that the column just by itself was so striking and strong that that won out in terms of editing in the end. But, you know, it's like when you're a photographer, it's like you are walking on the beach, picking up the pebbles, and you don't really separate the good pebbles from the bad pebbles until later. You're like, oh, these are the ones I'm going to keep. These other ones, they're just stones. You know, it's a little bit that kind of process. Oh, there she is. That's interesting to me because this is an example of one, like, this view in the photograph is with a wider lens and seems more expansive than when you stand here and look at it. That thing fills the space with a kind of energy. So this is a different look. It's interesting. It surprised me when I walked in this morning because I saw this picture last night and I walked in, I was like, wow, she's much bigger than she seems in this picture. And this is how sometimes a wide angle lens can change your perception of a space. Anyway, the picture itself is not the statue. The picture is pretty good, I think, but it's an interesting difference in rendering. Part of my problem was to get back further, you're going to wind up getting the case with the ship in. And it's like, it's not really going to work, you know? So things like that crop up all the time. Okay, so.
Questions?
Yeah, do anybody have any questions about anything? Yeah.
This is kind of silly, but I noticed some waste baskets. Was it hard to make decisions about moving something like that or keeping it as part of the building?
Yeah.
I always find that my default position is if I've elected to take the picture and the trash can is that prominent, then it probably needs to stay because that's part of the picture, part of the reason for taking it. It shows that it's, you know, there's everyday uses to it. There have probably been some occasions where I would move something, but that's pretty rare. Usually it's more about moving my camera.
Yeah, I do. I agree. Every once in a while we would, both of us might move something, and you'll notice like here, the velvet rope thing, that's everywhere in state capitals, you know, especially when you go into a chamber. Like, a lot of times the only way you can view a chamber without special permission is from the gallery, if they have a gallery, and most do, which is appropriate because the public should be able to go somewhere, right? And but if you're on the floor of the chamber, often there's a velvet rope and you walk, you know, at the back of the chamber, and that's as far as you can go as just somebody visiting and looking at the room. And so those velvet ropes often became part of the pictures we took. And I think it is part of the story. Every once in a while we would have more access and be able to move to different parts of the room depending on the capital, and that became less of an issue. I must say, in 2 cases, we removed things electronically after the fact. David did one in Illinois because I made him do it.
What did I remove?
That thing over Lincoln's head.
Right, the shadow. He didn't like that shadow at all.
The shadow was awful. And the other one, I was in Olympia, Washington, and I had these beautiful bas-relief brass doors that are like 25 feet high or something. So I'm photographing the door, you see the outside, and the light is raking across this carved door. It's beautiful. And there's a white van sitting there, like in the pull-up area. I mean, I got rid of it, you know. So I couldn't drive it away. I couldn't find the driver and ask him to move. So I spent the time in Photoshop and got rid of it. But, you know, yeah.
I do a lot of photography. I'm not for myself now. Sometimes I rely on luck when I do photography.
Yeah.
Because sometimes luck for me somehow plays better than looking for the right stuff. I don't know if that's how you feel. That's how I feel.
I had an instructor.
Repeat the question, so.
I'm sorry. Yeah, he was saying he, as a photographer, often relies on luck as opposed to trying to plan things out. And I think luck is a big part of it. I did have an instructor when I was just starting out in photography, a very well-known photographer named Gary Winogrand, and somebody asked him, isn't there a lot of luck in photography? And he said, you have to learn how to conspire with luck. And I always thought that was brilliant, because what that means is you got to keep your eyes open and see it when it's there. You got to have your camera with you, and you have to know how to operate your camera in a way that's somewhat second nature, so that, so yeah, I agree. And I think both David and I don't want to speak for you, but I don't know if you have, I've been yapping away. Go ahead.
Well, there's no question, luck plays a huge role in photography. It just does. But what Rob is saying, makes perfect sense. We need to be looking for that happenstance that helps us make the photograph. So it's very much a combination. But luck has always been. I think it's one of the reasons why some people who are not photographers can take absolutely outstanding, phenomenal images, because something lined up in front of them at the right time. And I think that happens more and more now, because the so-called cameras that we use much of the time, our phones, are so good at adjusting the light, capturing the picture, and rendering it well, that you combine that with some luck of something happening at just the right time, and we take a lot of good pictures these days.
Yeah. Yes.
Question was, with all the chambers that we have visited, the house chambers, is there any one that was...
Yeah.
I like the variation in that question, because so often we're asked, what's our favorite capital? And that's pretty much impossible to answer, because it changes all the time, just depending on which ones we're thinking of at the moment. But on the chambers, they tend to be so either ornate or maybe simple, but really, really well done and well executed. So I can think of a couple right off the bat that really stand out for me. Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, which is my home state, so my capital in that regard. It's mind-boggling. It's wonderful. But there are a lot of others too that really stand strongly on their own, even up against Harrisburg.
The most unique one that I saw, and really they're very beautiful, both the House and Senate chamber in Hawaii are incredible. They're shaped, the House and Senate chambers are shaped like volcanoes, intentionally. And so when you're in this space, you're in this very large conical space. And it's unlike any other room I've been in at that size. And they're decorated in a similar manner. They have these, behind the rostrum, they have very large tapestries made by a Hawaiian artist. One is heavily blue, the other one is red. And God, it was so strange, and the space is very beautiful. Of the more sort of conventional ones, one that I really liked, and it was one of the early ones I did, was the Senate chamber in Lansing, Michigan. It's really, really pretty cool. That's a building. I walked up to it and I thought it was kind of a gray day, and the outside of the building's kind of gray and not very, it's big, but it's, I don't know, it didn't strike me. You go inside, it's fabulous. it's it's a little like this in terms of the level of color and different things going on. That's well worth a visit.
Okay, here's a question.
Yeah.
Access to the different Capitol buildings is dictated by Capitol security or
Yeah.
and how much time do you spend at each location? How many exposures?
Yeah.
The question was, is our access to the different Capitol buildings dictated by security concerns, and how much time do we spend there? Security, for the most part, is never an issue any more than it was coming into this building today. You go through, you get screened, and check things in that way. Early on in the project, we found that a lot of Capitol buildings did not have any security. There might be a security guard or two in the building, but there was no screening to get in. Over the course of roughly 10 years that we worked on this, we saw that change, though. Most places now have that level of security. The bigger issues as far as access really pertain to the House and Senate chambers. You could almost always, with one or two exceptions, I think in Trenton, New Jersey, we had to have a guide with us everywhere we went. And was there somewhere else that we...
North Carolina had a process
to apply beforehand and get permission to get in. But typically, the spaces, the rotunda, all the obviously sort of public spaces are open, available. It was never an issue that we were bringing cameras in or cameras on a tripod. That was always fine. Most of the time, if we wanted to really get into a chamber and have more access than viewing it from the gallery, we generally had to arrange that beforehand with the Sergeant at Arms. And that sometimes was pretty easy, and sometimes it was very difficult and took a long time. And sometimes we just said, all right, we won't.
It didn't work out in some cases too, yeah. So I think over the course of the project, we were able to get enough Senate and House chambers to represent what that is. But yeah, it's still, I would have liked to have been able to get into every one of them.
What was the range of time that you spent at each site?
I would typically try to arrive at a Capitol building sometime in the afternoon. Often it was late afternoon of, let's call it the day before, I was really going to photograph. I would do exterior views. Frequently the buildings are lit on the outside, and that can make for some really nice night views. I could sometimes still get into the building, check it out, see what I'm going to get a sense of what I'll do tomorrow, and then often spend the whole next day there photographing. When I started, I usually didn't spend that much time, but that's also why I often then revisited those places where I hadn't spent so much time. Certain capitals, like Des Moines, which is also pretty spectacular, has pretty spectacular chambers. Because I spent so much time in Iowa photographing, and I became friends with a state senator there, he gave me a behind-the-scenes tour once, and I was in the basement and the attic and up in the dome that had been closed to the public 30 years before, and probably photographed that building 5 or 6 different times, but that was unusual. I just was there always, so I spent a lot of extra time on it.
Yeah, I would say, I'm sorry. I was just, about length of time, I would say the shortest amount of time would be like a half a day, a 4 or 5 hour half a day, but often it was longer, or we would revisit a place. Early on, I think we both spent less time than we wound up spending later as we got more into the project. And we both revisited some of the early ones just because it was like, I didn't know what I was doing then. And as far as number of exposures, it would range what, between like 300 and 600 images?
I really don't know, because I stopped paying attention to that a long time ago, but
Yeah,
a lot.
A lot. But a lot of those are multiple exposures of the same thing in order to get the right, you know, like if you've got daylight coming in a window and a dark area, you have to manage that, and that comes with doing different exposures. So if there were 500 or 600 pictures, it's not 500 or 600 different pictures. It might be 180 with different exposures. Yeah, Jeannie.
That was sort of where my question was going. So you thinking about 350 setups or specific images? And then how many images did you end up taking all together? And the result of them ended up in the book? And are you going to do anything else with the rest of the images to sort of curate them in another way?
This was some more question about how many pictures we've taken, how many different setups, how many exposures over the whole project, and are we going to do anything else with some of these images, curating them for other purposes in other ways. It wouldn't be that difficult to come up with that number of how many exposures did I do on this whole project, but I'd have to go into Lightroom and spend a few minutes coming up with that. I don't even have a guess. Thousands and thousands, but yeah. I don't know.
I would say the average is probably 400 images per capital, with some being lower and some being higher.
And some being a whole lot higher because we each did that at a given capital.
That's true. Yeah, on the capitals that we both visited, either together or separately, we each would have that number of photographs. So yeah, that's true. I hadn't considered that, but we both really. I would say there are, I think, 14 capitals that each of us have not been to. That was the purview of the other person during the project, and we both want to get to all of them now. I mean, the book's out and all that, but you know, I really want to go to all of them.
And we're doing that.
Yeah.
And in June, I was in Lansing, Michigan, on my way home from being out west, and I spent a good part of a day photographing there, just because. As far as other uses, the answer, I guess, is possibly. And there are some things. We're exhibiting the work. We have an exhibit right now at the Mandel Gallery at the JCC in West Hartford. That show is coming down in about 2 weeks, I think. We'll be doing an exhibit of the work in New Haven sometime this fall. If you are interested in trying to keep up with that, CapitalAmerica.com is the website for the book and the project, and I try to keep upcoming events up to date on there. So we will be here, we'll be hanging around here for at least a little bit, so if there are other questions, feel free to come up to either one of us to ask. There is, well, we've got a copy of the book up here. There's a table in the back with a copy of the book if you want to look at it. And you'll see there's a little QR code back there. If you want to get the website into your phone, you can do that very easily.
Thank you all. This is really gratifying. Thank you.
Thank you very much.